Hello, and welcome to Life with God, a podcast where we explore key ideas in God through conversations with students and expert guests. In Season 4, we focus on the concept of beauty, and our guest in episode 11 is David Sedlacek, professor of family ministry and discipleship of the Seventh-day Adventist Theological Seminary at Andrews University in Berrien Springs, Michigan. We're also joined in this conversation by Samuel Eduardo Ricratimana, Sarah Burton, and Michael Body II. Before the conversation, we will take 5 minutes to get to know our guests with some questions. What do you miss most about your childhood?
I miss being on the farm with my 9 sisters and 5 brothers and mom and dad, and just the ability to play freely on the farm.
What is your favorite characteristic of God and why?
My favorite characteristic of God is his amazing love. I appreciate that so much about God.
What is your favorite childhood memory?
My favorite childhood memory is when I was able to go out up north in Wisconsin and go fishing with my dad.
What is your favorite biblical verse?
My favorite biblical verse is oh my goodness, I have so many favorite biblical verses, but I like this one. Fear thou not, for I'm with you, and be not dismayed, for I'm your God. I'll strengthen you. I'll help you. I'll uphold you with my righteous right hand.
Beautiful. Could you share with us the major steps in your professional career?
Yes. I began back in 1972 to work as a addictions counselor for the city of Cleveland in their House of Corrections. And I've been working in various capacities in the field of addiction ever since, but also, as a pastor and a chaplain and in many other capacities, and now as a professor, but they've all built on one another so beautifully. Just God has just led and opened doors. That's the part I've loved most, is to see the way God has just opened doors to go from one area to another. And now I have this wonderful ability to invest in the lives of students. That's one of my favorite things to do.
You said what your favorite Bible verse is, but what is your favorite Bible verse to preach from if it's different?
To preach from if it's different. I love Ephesians chapter 3. Starting in verse 20, where we're to be strengthened with might by his spirit in our inner man. And then how our love is, we're rooted and grounded in the love of God. I mean, to me, I love to just preach from those verses.
What does family mean to you?
Oh, really, family means everything to me. And not just my own family, my wife, my children, parents, brothers and sisters, but the larger family, like the family I have at work and the family I have in the classroom. I mean, the family I have with my colleagues at work, all of those levels of family and the connections and intimacy and relationships I have means so much to me.
What is your favorite color and why?
My favorite color is blue. And the reason that it is I love the deep blue sky and the royalty that connotes to my mind.
If you were something in nature, this is my favorite question always. If you were something in nature, what would you be?
If I were something in nature, I think that the thing that comes to my mind, the animal that comes to my mind is a lion. And a lion is royal. I mean, I don't look at the downside of the lion, like he kills other animals, but the royalty of the lion, reflects to me the royalty of God. And so I really love lions for that reason.
Where is your favorite place to travel and why?
Oh my, I've been all over the world, but so there's so much beauty in so many places that I've been, but perhaps my favorite place to go, because it's a relationship place, is to go to Huntsville, Alabama, because that's where I have my son, daughter-in-law, and some of my grandbabies. And I have a lot of connections and people there that I know because I used to teach at Oakwood. So going back there is sometimes like going back home.
Awesome.
What is your favorite holiday and how do you celebrate it?
Well, my favorite holiday is Thanksgiving. And the reason why is that we have a tradition that's the day more than any other holiday when we all get together as family and really celebrate sometimes. And I get to see a lot of my grandsons and you know their spouses and all of that and great grandbabies. But it's just this great family time for us. So that's why I love Thanksgiving.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing and also for all the questions. Our topic today is God's beauty and family. And you just talked about how so many times in this speed round of questions, how much family means to you in different ways. And so I'm really curious to dig into the discussion. Our opening question is going to be simply, how do you understand God's God's beauty to be manifested at its best, maybe I can say, in the family context?
Okay. I think to understand beauty, we need to understand from the beginning when God created the first family, the first Adam and Eve, when he made them, formed them out of the dust of the earth, and then he made Eve out of Adam's rib and formed her, they came out absolutely beautiful. Now, by beautiful there, I mean both externally beautiful and internal. I mean, there was no flaw of any kind in Adam or Eve. I mean, I can imagine when Adam first saw Eve, it would be, whoa, you know, just this gorgeous woman externally. But their character was filled with God's character of love. And so there was an internal beauty, you know, a connection that was so natural between the two of them and between the two of them and God. And then now, if I take a look at beauty, I think the internal beauty that attracts you to one another in family. For example, when I met Beverly, you know, Beverly is just a gorgeous African-American woman, and I was certainly touched by her external beauty. But even more so, she was just a God lover. I mean, despite the fact that she had come through some hard times in her life, she had just learned to develop this love for God, this spiritual self. And so for me, I think internal beauty is the beauty of character, the beauty of who a person is. And a lot of times we tend to look at people's value based upon what they do. But I want to say that true beauty, true godliness is defined by who people are much more than what people do. And the beauty of character, and again, character can be defined as that spiritual part of us, you know, both our thoughts and our emotions and feelings kind of make up the moral character, you know, that spiritual part of ourselves that reflects most beautifully the character of God. And when you see that reflected in a person, oh, it just draws me to that person. I just love that about Beverly, about many of the other people that I have come to meet. And so to me, that is the beauty of relationships, the beauty of trying to navigate relationships and even build relationships. And as a parent, I believe that it's one of my jobs to build beauty in my children. And again, I'm talking here not only about external, handsome beauty. My kids are to die for. They're just really good looking kids. But I'm more interested in the internal beauty. How can I form their character to be lovers of God and lovers of other people, and to get themselves out of the way so that God can just shine through in their lives?
Dr. Sedlacek, you kind of spoke to it, but how would you encourage somebody that may feel like God's beauty can't be seen from their family because they came from a broken home or they were raised by just one parent or something of that nature, how would you encourage them to see that God's beauty could still be seen through their circumstance?
Michael, that is such a wonderful question. One of the things that I think is really important to understand is that Satan tries to destroy beauty.
Mhm.
And he just tries to destroy beauty in people. And I think one of the things that the work of emotional healing does, for example, if you take a look at this scripture verse, it says God creates beauty, or gives us beauty for ashes.
Mhm.
And so a lot of us, ashes, the destruction that we've experienced as a part of our childhood experiences, God wants to take those ashes right where they are and then reform them and reshape them and create beauty out of them. And that's one of the jobs I think that the church can do, if the church is a safe place for that. That's how a spouse can do. We can do that for one another as we love each other sacrificially. We can bring beauty even out of the most broken situation. And I also think things like inner healing prayer and really seeing people and connecting them with God in an emotional healing experience enables them to really view the beauty of God and be drawn by the beauty of God, and even be drawn, if you will, by the beauty of the cross, the beauty of his death and the glory of his resurrection. I mean, to me, that's this creative beauty that I think God wants to create in each one of us, even if we didn't start out that way.
Thank you.
Based on what you said about family, what do you think is the best legacy a parent could give to his children or her children according to God?
The best legacy. Okay. I mean, often we think of our legacy as, well, I want to leave this large amount of money to my kids, or I want to make them wealthy or whatever. I don't think that's the best legacy that we can give. I think the best legacy that we can leave is a life that we've lived in connection with God ourselves. As we have lived in connection with God, and we have loved well because we have been filled with the love, the character, if you will, or the beauty of God. When we've been filled with that, doesn't it naturally come out of us then to our children, to other people, so that, when we die, for example, it's like people will hopefully see that we've lived a life with God and of God and for God. And we've invested in the lives of other people as a part of that.
Going off of the idea of legacy and character molding of children, what are some practical steps that you took when you were raising your kids to develop their character in the way that you believe God wanted them to grow up?
Mm-hmm. One of the most important things is, rather than making demands upon my children, I tried to draw out of them the beauty that I saw in them. Okay. For example, I wanted to really see my children and to help them know that I saw them and I saw their hearts. So let me give you one example. When our son Michael was about 9 years old, he, again, being a mixed child, he went to a school that was predominantly white. And all the kids they had white hair and they were dyeing their hair. And he wanted to dye his hair too. As a little mixed boy, he wanted to dye his hair. His mom said, no, you can't dye your hair. And so, I thought, well, what would really bless Michael? I wanted to really see his heart, and so I took him down to the drugstore. We bought some dye. He and I came home, went into the bathroom, and I dyed Michael's hair. I helped him dye his hair. Okay. Because I really tried to see his heart, his desire, his longing, his need. And I knew that if you fight about something, you're going to create tension and, there's no need to fight. But this was going to be a passing fad, and it certainly was. It's just something he felt he needed to do. And I wanted to see and support him in that. And so seeing our children and creating, the second thing I would say is being safe for them to come and share whatever their challenges are. I want my children to talk to me, even, to know that if they do, they're not going to get a lecture, for an hour about what a rotten kid they are. They're not going to get beat over the head with the Bible or something else, but they're going to get someone who hears them, who understands, who's been there myself, and who can relate to them even in their missteps, but that they can come and be safe. That to me models the love of God, because he sees us and he's a safe person for us to come and to share whatever it is we're struggling with or whatever it is that we've done.
I'd like to go back a little bit to the concept of being and doing that you mentioned earlier on. I'm trying to formulate my question. I am aware that oftentimes I focus on doing. I'm a task person. I like checking things off my list. I like to accomplish things. And in that process, I do sometimes forget about being, or I don't prioritize being, let's say. But I do wonder, is this a real dichotomy, or are the two supposed to harmonize together? And if they're supposed to harmonize together, maybe I'm giving a lead here of my thinking, how do we go about providing that harmony? And also in relation to Michael's question, I guess many times we have these ideals in our head about what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to behave, but we have triggers that prevent us from doing that. I think we all can say, we can say here in the conversation that we all have those triggers. Some of them we worked on more than others. So how can we overcome those triggers when we maybe don't have access to all the facilities and counseling and the help that we could use in order to reach that harmony that I'm talking about between being and doing?
Okay, that's
a lot.
That's a lot. But let me begin this way. At Jesus' baptism, his father spoke of his identity. He said, "You are my beloved son, in whom I'm well pleased." So he articulated his identity, who he was, and then how he gave him an affirmation. I'm well pleased with you. Now, Jesus had not yet begun his ministry. Okay. So his father just spoke his identity. You are my beloved son. Okay. Now it's so telling that right after that, when he went into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil, what was the devil's attack? If you are the Son of God, in other words, if you are really who your father said you were, then turn these stones into bread. Throw yourself off the temple. Okay. In other words, do something to prove it.
Okay.
And Jesus was pursued by the devil all the way to the cross. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross, save yourself. Then we'll believe you. Just attack after attack, even on the cross, based to erode his sense of identity. I believe that if you take a look at relationships, you have to take a look at who am I alone, which is my identity first, and then who am I in relationship with someone else. Okay. I have to get settled on who am I alone, my identity first. Who am I? Am I of value? Am I lovable? Am I precious? Do I know who I am? Or am I still allowing other people to define me? Oh, so many of us, and when I allow other people to define us, it's generally based on something that I do that they don't like. Not who I am, but something that I don't preach a good enough sermon, or I misbehave somehow, or I do something, I have an opinion that they don't like. And what that does, when you know who you are, you're able then to value yourself, not for what other people think about you, but for who God thinks about you, first of all. I mean, can you picture Jesus saying to you, you are my beloved son or my beloved daughter in whom I'm well pleased? And just rest, set with that, because that is what he says to you too. And so the value is, you have to have the solid identity first, or we're going to be subject to or weak to the attacks that come our way when other people don't like things that we've said or things that we've done, or whatever it is that however they evaluate us. And so, yes, I think it's true. I do think it's true that we need to have a balance of what we do. But I think what we do is living out of who we are. Too many of us don't have a solid sense of who we are. We're not well differentiated, and we get into doing, and we define ourselves by what we do rather than who we are. And that's why I'm suggesting that finding the beauty of who we are first and being able to rest in what God says of us, how he sees us. And there's plenty of things in his word that talk about affirming messages. We're precious in his sight. He loved us with an everlasting love. He'll never leave us nor forsake us. I mean, there's so many scriptures that talk about how God sees us. And when we don't rest in that and even pour that into our children, those kind of affirmations, then we leave them with trying to figure out who they are based upon what they do. And then that's where the confusion comes in to really people can't sort out their value from what they do. And they become very susceptible then to the attacks of the enemy.
So much said in so few words. Thank you very much. And I just wanted to highlight a key idea that comes to my head right now, based on what you shared, that our identity is unmerited. Just based on the beautiful example of Jesus where you shared, I have never heard that before, that God shares the identity of Jesus before he did anything, before he began his ministry. And that's unmerited. You don't have to do anything to earn that identity. God pronounces it on you. So that's a lot right there. Yeah, thank you.
Can't help. Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Michael.
Oh, sorry. Just a quick question. We know that love is an essential aspect of helping a family to thrive. So we know it's important to love each other, but do you think it's essential that family members like each other as well, in addition to love? Like, even if you have a conflict with a family member or you don't see everything, the same way, do you think love is enough, even if you don't like that family member?
Well, that's really interesting. I think both love and like are important. And so a part of it is, do I like the person, or do I like what they do? Or don't I like the person, or don't I like what they do, or how they conduct themselves? And I think I can genuinely love a person in a family, and maybe not like what they do, or even I may not like the prickliness of their character, of who they are, but I'm still called upon to love them nonetheless. And love gets expressed in very practical ways. I mean, Jesus said, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, pray for those who despitefully use you and persecute you. That's what makes you a child of God. And I think we're called to a higher level as Christians to that kind of love, no matter what someone does, because isn't that what Jesus did? He loved us even while we were his enemies. But I think we need to then really make an extra effort, even when people fall short, or even in their brokenness. Remember, hurt people, right? And so if someone hurts me, how am I going to respond to that with the love of God, so there's not a wedge that's put between us that at least comes from this direction toward them. I want to love them, even if they're hurt by me. In other words, I want to do this amazing thing, which is keep my heart open to them. And you can only do that when you know that you're loved for who you are, with all your brokenness and all your sinfulness. When you really know that about yourself, then you're able to, in a mature way, hold on to yourself, even when someone else falls short. And you may not like what they do, but you'll be able to have conversations about it. You'll be able to try to build connections with them, have reconciliation, even when there's a break in the relationship. So again, we may not like everything that everyone does. We may not like people's character, but we still need to pursue them as family members, as precious children of God.
Thank you.
Yeah, that really was actually getting to my question about differentiating between being and doing. If we're going to differentiate, someone's identity from the actions, how does that have practical applications for how we relate to those who we would consider otherwise our enemies? And I think Michael's question and your response to Michael's question really got to that. But maybe I can change that a little bit and ask my own question of, for example, I have two kids. I've got a 4-year-old and I have a 2-year-old, and they throw temper tantrums because little kids do that. How, for me, I have to think sometimes on a very practical level of, if a child is in the middle of a crisis, how do I separate how I feel towards my child and how I feel towards what they're doing, which may be very unpleasant. What are some things that you did with your kids when they would misbehave or do something that was even damaging to you or to somebody else or to themselves? How do you help them to see, to develop their character and their identity apart from these actions, which may be fleeting, but which could have longer term consequences?
Well, one of the things that I learned not to do is I learned not to lose myself with them. And by losing myself, I mean be emotionally reactive with them, get all mad and upset, at that, because I can't be objective with them if I'm gone, if I've lost myself. Okay. So learning to hold on to myself and see them, even in their misbehavior or even in a temper tantrum, so I would ask myself, what is best for my child here in this moment? In other words, my response will not be about me and how they may be making me look in the middle of a grocery store having a temper tantrum. It's not about me. And again, parents who are still immature emotionally, what their kids do, they think reflects upon them. And they make it about them rather than about the child. God does the same thing. He makes it about us, So he was willing to suffer the shame of the cross, for me. And I need to be willing to do the same thing for my kids. So if let's say they're having a temper tantrum, okay, I might go up to them and pick them up, okay, and take them out. And I might look at them in the face and I might say to them, I love you. I might help them take a deep breath. Take a deep breath, my little one. Take a deep breath. Daddy loves you. Look at them right in the face and bring peace. If I can look at them with love, really see them and look at them with a love in my face, that tends to settle most children down. Okay. And then once they're settled down, when the time is right, I would want to go back to them and say, now let's talk about what just happened. What was going on with you? And really begin processing with them in such a way that they are going to be able to remember how Daddy responded to this. And as I speak and live peace and love with them, that's going to become internalized into their brain. You see, their natural losing of themselves by having a tantrum, for example, is wired into their brain. It becomes a natural response. What I want to do is rewire a new pathway into their brain based upon them holding on to themselves. And if I lose it, what message is that giving them? that it's okay for them to do the same thing. I want to model what I want them to, how I want them to live. And so those might be some things, just a way of handling that particular thing. So, and I do think that that's a reflection of the way God relates to us as his children too.
Like Elijah.
Mhm.
It makes me think of how he responded when Elijah was all in a tizzy and God
Mhm.
first took care of his needs and then dealt with the problem.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, how important are relationships in family to know the beauty of God? Well, as a marriage, as siblings, as parents, as children, do you think that people that didn't have the blessing of a functional family have problems to know the beauty of God?
I do. And I want to give you one example of this. I told you earlier that my wife, in my eyes, is just very beautiful outside and inside. Okay. But I want to just pose this question because I think it often destroys families. But so if I look at other women, okay, can I see the beauty in them? Can I genuinely see the beauty in them without going to lust? Okay. And I think that's an important question. Can we see the beauty in one another and appreciate the beauty in one another without it becoming, if you will, sexually inappropriate, where my mind starts wandering and, thinking about this and about that, related to them and their bodies. And so I think that is something that if we know ourselves and we're connected with God, I mean, I think, for example, that Jesus was able to see the beauty in Mary Magdalene, but not want to go to bed with her because he knew who he was, he knew his mission, he knew his purpose, and he was faithful to that. And when the temptation came for him to cross that line, he was able to say, no, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to undress her with my eyes. I'm not going to do anything like that because my love for her is pure. I can appreciate her beauty without sexualizing her in that sense. And I think often your question, Samuel, was in families, when we have family dysfunction and family brokenness, how do we function seeing the beauty in our children? And one of the things that I like to think about, even for my own children, when our son was born, Beverly and I have a son together. When our son was born, we intentionally did this. We lifted him up and verbally dedicated him to God. We said, God, this boy is yours to use for your purposes. And so, in other words, I don't own my son. Why? Because I gave him to God. Okay. And so now I relate to him as a very handsome young man, a very vibrant, vivacious young man who is full of energy, as a steward. God, you have given me this son, you've given me this boy, not for me to possess, because he's yours, but Lord, I am going to invest in this boy because you've given me the responsibility of being his parent, to kind of shape him and mold him after your beautiful character, God. And so now that's hard to do when there is a real history of brokenness. And so the first gift I can give my children, in my view, the first gift I can give my children is my own journey of healing from my brokenness, because all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. we're all sons and daughters of Adam and Eve. And because of that, we all have brokenness. And so the most important thing I can do is be on my own journey, and not try to have them force them to do stuff that I'm not doing myself. And so it's to be God for them. It's to model that for them. And when I do make a mistake, I know for me, one of the things that I have done is I go to them and I admit it. I admit it. I say, to one of my children, I hurt you. I'm so sorry I did, and please forgive me. And then I intentionally make it a point of working hard not to do that same thing again, especially if I see that it's a pattern that I have habitually done. So I get the help I need. I'm on my own journey of healing. That's the best thing I can do for my children, for my wife.
I would love to delve a little bit more into the Bible, because I love how you draw from scripture different episodes with implications for our topic. And I'm sure you read the Bible with different eyes than others do because of your background and your training. So maybe what kind of stories speak on the topic that you could share, or characters or insights that you would like to add to what you already shared?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes all the way back to the beginning of Scripture, not just with creation, but with the fall of man and how God handled that, and His promise of redemption. And so, to me, that's the foundation story: is how did God handle our misbehavior?
Okay.
As our heavenly Daddy, how did He handle our misbehavior? That I think it goes there. I think there are some examples of poor managing. For example, when Amnon and Tamar, for example, when Amnon raped Tamar, David didn't handle that well, in my opinion. The Bible says he was angry, but he didn't do anything about it that we can see in the Bible. So Absalom took matters into his own hands and ended up killing his brother. And that whole issue of sexual sin, again, remember, it started with David and Bathsheba, even before that. But that has been passed along negatively from generation to generation there. That's an example of managing it poorly.
Mm-hmm.
But I see beautiful promises. For example, in the book of Hosea, chapter 2, and if I can just turn there for a minute, this is a beautiful, beautiful story of God trying to give us a model from the Word of God. And okay, I'm here. Okay, so it says, so now he begins the conversation by talking about Israel being a prostitute and going away and not being treated well, and then in verse 8 it says, she doesn't realize it was I who gave her everything she has, the grain, the new wine, the olive oil. I even gave her silver and gold, but she gave my gifts to Baal. But now I will take back the ripened grain and the new wine I generously provided each harvest of the season. Okay, and then his talking about her is humbling her so that she will be ready to receive the fullness of the gift that God has for her. Okay, and then in verse 14 it says, but then I will win her back once again. I will lead her into the desert and speak tenderly to her there. She will give herself to me there, as she did long ago when she was young, when I freed her from her captivity in Egypt. And when that day comes, says the Lord, you will call me my husband instead of my master. O Israel, I will wipe the many names of Baal from your lips, and you will never mention them again. And it goes on and on talking about that. And there are many times in the book of Isaiah, Hosea, others, where he talks with Israel, or with us now, as the bride, as his lover, and he promises restoration. He promises healing for us. And those are some of the things that some of the verses that really stand out to me. But all the way, I love even the book of Revelation about he's the bridegroom and we're the bride, whether we're male or female. At this point, we're the bride of God, and he wants to, if you will, perform this heavenly marriage ceremony after he comes again and takes us to heaven. And I can only imagine the amazing experience that is going to be for all of us, is to experience Jesus as this beautiful, beautiful husband of each of us. And that's whether we're single, by the way, or whether we're married. All of that, all of our desires will be met in him at that point.
Thank you. Maybe you already touched on this, but I'm curious if you could articulate, you mentioned how God handled sin, and I think you expanded a bit on that, but how would you articulate it maybe for somebody who doesn't know the story so much? Maybe some of our viewers who are not as familiar with the theme of the Bible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think at that point, it would be, how do I relate to them as a representative of God at this point? I may not speak about Jesus or speak about God or speak about any of that, but do I show in my own life to them real genuine care and love? Do I listen to them? Do I want to develop a relationship with them? Do they know that I really care about them? That's what I think is the best thing we can do in the life of someone who may not know Jesus. I mean, for example, if someone comes to me as in counseling, and I'm a Christian counselor, I use the Bible a lot in my counseling, but if they're not a Christian, I don't use that same methodology. I work with them. I start with where they're at. And I think that that's what God often does with us. And so let me listen to you. I want to hear your story. It's not about me. It's about you. So I want to love you right where you are. And if you then start asking me questions, or you start, how can you love me that way? You don't even know me, and if they start asking, I'll just continue loving. And, if they keep asking, I might open the door to sharing a couple of things. But the point is, I want to take them right where they're at, love them where they're at, and respond given what they need, rather than what I think as a Christian I should tell them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Sedlacek, Adelina's question is related to the one I was thinking of. When we experience God's beauty, when we experience the love of God in our lives, the natural reaction is that we want to tell people about him. We want other people to love God and experience God as well. And each of us probably have people in our families who aren't living up to all the truth that has been revealed to them. Either they were raised in the church and they strayed away, or they're just not in a place where, we would like them to be, or where God would want them to be. And so I guess my question, kind of related to the one Adelina just asked, is how do we minister to, or how do we try to reach, our family members who aren't living up to all the light that they know? And how do we do it in a way that's not unhealthy, such as starting to enable their behavior or pester them or things like that? What are the appropriate boundaries that we should put upon that to make our efforts most effective?
Now, that question can take a long answer, perhaps, but let me just share a couple of thoughts with you. I don't want to make the assumption But just because someone leaves the church, as many people do today, especially a lot of our youth and young adults, I don't want to make the assumption that just because they leave the organized church, that they've left Jesus. Because, you know, the reason why many people do leave is because they've been hurt, you know, by members of the church, or because we've treated them with, you have to do this, you know, keep all the rules, and, you know, and not do this and not do that. And when we give that message, I think we give the wrong message about the love and the beauty of God. And so I think we need to take a look at that first of all. But just because someone ends up making a decision to leave for whatever reason that they do, I want to pursue them. But my pursuit is not, oh, you have to come back into the church, even though that would be wonderful. But I want to, you know, tell me what happened. You know, tell me about where you're at right now. And, you know, how are you and God doing these days? You know, I would want to explore those kinds of things. And frankly, Michael, there's this thing that is awful that I've been exploring myself called spiritual trauma or spiritual abuse, where people are wounded spiritually by people who represent God in their lives or are meant to represent God. And that makes it very difficult for them to genuinely have an intimate relationship with God for themselves because the way that they've been hurt. And so I would certainly want to find out what's going on, what happened, were you wounded, were you hurt? I would try to really continue building relationship with them and try to invite them to, you know, even though you may leave the organization, you know, let's not leave Jesus. You know, he loves you no matter what. And so I would want to deal with them very tenderly. I would want to, you know, hear their story. I would want to be an instrument of healing, if at all possible, and reconciliation, if at all possible. But I would, my ultimate goal would be for them to not leave Jesus in the process.
So going back to this topic of spiritual abuse, how do we, if we view the church as kind of a family, how do we hold each other accountable for when abuse takes place within the family? You mentioned a little bit about like David and Tamar and Amnon and how he didn't hold Amnon accountable. How do we deal with things like abuse in the church family setting, and make sure that we are protecting the members of our family?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that, because that's something that's very dear to my heart. In the church, both the North American Division and the World Church, one of the ministries that we have is called End It Now, and ending it is ending any kind of abuse that goes on, and we need to educate our members about how to go about doing that. We need to be able to speak up when abuse occurs and not enable the abuse. We need to do things like believe the victim rather than saying, oh, you brought it on yourself, or he would never do such a thing. You know, we need to be willing to believe the victim. We need to be willing to, if what has happened is a legal matter, we need to not do the investigation ourselves and be the judge and jury ourselves. We need to understand that we follow the laws of the land. And so if there has been a violation of some kind of a law, we need to report it. And then we need to let the investigation be done by either child protection or the police department or the appropriate authority. And then we need to deal with that as a family afterwards too, you know, to really have honest conversations about it. And again, this has the potential to tear church families apart, and it does. But we need to be willing to walk through those difficult times And one of the things I like to suggest is that we need to anticipate these kinds of things happening and be prepared for them in advance so that when they happen, we're ready, we have a process in place in our local church to deal with them. The other thing I would suggest is that in our churches, we need to create safe places for people to talk, to really live family in our churches. In other words, let me just give you one example. Journey to Wholeness is our church's Christ-centered 12-step program. And it's a safe place for people to meet weekly to talk about whatever their issues are, to come and to work on a journey toward wholeness. And so that's one way of doing it. We can have educational events that happen in local churches about emotional healing, about abuse, trauma, and one of the things that's happening right now is that at Andrews University, there's an international center for the treatment of trauma treatment and care that's in the School of Social Work. And having these kinds of opportunities where they could come and talk and share emotional healing weekends, small group ministries, I think, are an excellent opportunity for people to get to really know each other deeply, much more deeply than you can in a large Sabbath school or a large church service. And so I think all of those provide opportunities for us to become educated, to know what does the law require, and how can we operate within that in a loving and kind and supportive way? How can we get the victim the help they need? How can we even help the perpetrator get the help that they need? And hopefully bring about some type of reconciliation if that's possible.
I wonder if we'd also talk a little bit about neurodiversity and neurodivergence. It's something that is rarely part of our conversations, but as somebody who has recently realized, in conjunction with some testing and a lot of research, that I'm most likely a neurodivergent, and in conversation with many other people, realizing that many other people are also neurodiverging in different ways, that it's not such a small percentage after all. And just learning that we function differently, our brain structures can be different, and that impacts also, I want to say, the way we do things. We have different skills and abilities, and we have to honor also who we are and not try to be something different. What are some of your thoughts on that note in regards to our topic of holistic beauty, maybe?
Well, let me begin by saying this. As a white man, I have had to face the topic of my own white privilege. And honestly as I can, see what that affords me, the opportunities that affords me that other people don't have. And I need to look at that, male versus female, and how women are disadvantaged, both in the church as well as in the society around us in terms of salary inequities and all of those kind of things. And then when it comes to racial minorities, see, how they are disadvantaged simply because of the color of their skin, not because of their giftedness, not because of anything else. They're disadvantaged compared to me. And when I began looking at this honestly, I was brokenhearted. I mean, look at, unintentionally, simply because of who I am in terms of my skin, how other people have been hurt by that. And so having very honest and real conversations about that, I think are very, very important. Being able to be humble about that and be a good listener and learner about that. There was even a 12-step group that was formed out in California called Racist Anonymous to take a look at racism using a 12-step framework. And honestly, having someone facilitate the group who was a minority, kind of facilitating the group among people who were the majority. I mean, and I think that's such an important thing. Um, and so I think that we need to see the value in others, even if, for example, one of the things that we've been looking at more closely lately is, as a teacher in the seminary, how do I teach in such a way that I speak to diversity? Different learning styles, different cultural norms. From how do I honor all of those things and speak to all of those things? So I'm not just speaking from kind of a white North American perspective. So, I mean, those are just a couple of thoughts about this extensive topic of diversity and how to begin honoring that and speaking to it and teaching to it and living to it. I think I have an advantage in a sense because, I have a wife, who's African American, and I had to learn African American culture when we got married, or even before we got married. It's like, oh, okay, what it's like to live with someone who thinks like a Black woman, like a Black person, and that's different than the way I thought. And how do I adjust to that, accommodate to that, rather than forcing it to be my way? How can we together make a life together that honors both of our cultural backgrounds and expose our children to both of our cultural backgrounds?
Well, in your opinion, what could be a model family in the Bible? We have mentioned very characteristics that are good. So, and what can we learn from them?
Well, I think Jesus was raised in a blended family. As I look at Joseph, Joseph had children already when he and Mary got married. And so I think we need to be able to look at blended families, some of the wonderful blessings of blended families. How do you make two families with children come together successfully and see the blessings of both families? And how do I embrace children that are not biologically mine, but because I chose to marry this person, her children become my children? In my case, for example, my precious wife was a single mom. So she had Eric when she was 14 years old. I've taken him as my son. I was married before I married Beverly for 12 and a half years. She had a 2-year-old son when we got married. I adopted him as my own. Then we had 2 children of our own. And now when Beverly and I got married, it was her son, my children coming together, in a blended family, and making that work requires, some level of maturity where we really embrace them as ours, not yours, but they're mine as well. By marrying you, I'm taking the responsibility of marrying your children too, and investing as much in them, not playing favorites because they're my biological kids, but giving every child the same opportunities, regardless of who their biological parents were. And then investing in them, loving them, nurturing them, seeing them. Because remember, children have often a difficult time adjusting as well to living in a different cultural situation, because often they'll still have their other biological parent if there was a divorce, for example, or a separation, and they still have to have a relationship with them, but also with me and with my spouse. And so how you make those very difficult dynamics work in love, I think that's another, perhaps a biblical example of a challenge that a lot of families have to live with these days.
Thank you very much. I think we're nearing the end of the conversation, but maybe there's another question. We can take a few minutes for that and then share takeaways before we conclude.
Question. So nowadays, Dr. Sedlacek, it seems like there's a lot of confusion and a lot of debate on family roles, and gender roles. What is the husband supposed to do? What is the wife supposed to do? So on and so forth. Can you give us some biblical insight as to, what the Bible teaches are God's desire for different roles in the family?
I think, Michael, that the first place I would want to go in response to your question is way back in the beginning. And I think before sin, there were no different roles. Well, she cooks because she's the wife, or he does this. I think there was a natural complementarity to male and female back then. And I think as a result of sin, if you will, some of the things that God said about Adam and Eve after the fall, I think even the things that he described there were not prescriptive. This is the way it has to be, but I think they were more descriptive of the way things would be. And I think what we've done as a society is we have created male and female roles that we now believe people should fit into. But I don't think it should always. I think we as Christians need to be a little more broad-minded than that. And so I think, for example, women have this marvelous role even in ministry that we've kind of taken away from them for so long. And I don't think that's really what the Bible teaches. The Bible gives a richness of women in a variety of different roles, including judges and prophetesses, and even apostles, early on, not apostles, but, leaders in the church early on, elders, for example. And so I think we need to take a look at that richness of diversity. And I would like to really point us back to the earth made new, because isn't that where we're heading?
Mm-hmm.
And shouldn't we be looking at going back to the original plan of God in the Garden of Eden, rather than settling for, an assigned role that we think should be her role or his role, and instead be loving and secure enough within ourselves to talk about those things and to negotiate them. Some men are great cooks, and they love cooking. I do laundry. All of that kind of stuff. We have to be willing to be big enough and secure enough to have just honest conversations about, in our families, how are we going to maintain the home? How are we going to take care of all the responsibilities that go into that?
Thank you very much. Great question. And I'm glad we got to cover this a little bit as well. So let's move into takeaways. What are some of the insights you're taking from this conversation? Remember, you're not limited to one, but you're welcome to take your time and share how do you move forward with new insights from this discussion?
For me, I feel like the biggest takeaway is that God is love, God loves us, and everything that he's created is a demonstration of his love, including the family. And so, although because of sin, our families aren't perfect, we're all flawed, we're all, have our own things that we're dealing with. God can redeem any situation, God can redeem any family. And even through, our mess ups, our sin, God could still find a way to show his beauty through our circumstance. So that's probably the biggest takeaway I've gotten from this conversation.
I think one of the things that I took away is the role of affirmation and love in dealing with situations, crisis situations, or even you were mentioning Jesus at the beginning of his ministry, where God affirms him and says, "This is who you are." And I think recognizing the difference between the identity of someone and their actions, hopefully their actions correspond to their identity, but because we are sinful human beings, there is sometimes that divide, and that distance between who we are and who we want to be, and the kinds of things that we do. And having grace, I think, with each other, with our children, with our church members, with members of our biological or chosen family. I think extending that grace and seeing how Jesus treated people, first by affirming them and giving them the love that they needed, and the healing that they needed before addressing some of the other issues. I think that's really important.
Well, one thing that I'm thinking of is that Christians families have the duty of teach the beauty of God and also recreate the beauty of God.
Yeah, I guess I would share maybe two things. I really like the concept of unearned identity, where God pronounces our identity before we do anything about it. And we see that in Genesis 1 and 2. And I think we can draw from that in our daily life, how we see ourselves. And then again, what we do hopefully springs from that identity that is unearned. And also just the concept of beauty and diversity. I think when you use this term beauty and diversity, maybe it sounds almost it sounds superficial in the way maybe it's been done. I think the real beauty and diversity is in communicating with each other about the diversity, about the differences, whatever those are. And when you open up that space of sharing of yourself and listening to another person, and learning how to honor those differences and to harmonize and complement each other, maybe whether it's a couple, whether it's a family, whether it's a community, a larger community. I think that's a real beauty in opening up the space for sharing and listening. And it can be real, something that makes a real difference in our day-to-day relationships. So thank you very much for all the rich insights from the Bible, from your background research, and just your life experience, I guess. And what would be your final words for the group, but also for our viewers and listeners?
I would like to suggest that all beauty originates with God. All beauty originates with God. And I believe that when he created Adam and Eve, they were naked and unashamed. But they were covered with God's glory. And when I think about them being covered with God's glory, I believe that glory was light, but it was the light of God's character, the light of who God was, and so I think that is what each of us as believers in Jesus, believers in God, our ideal is to become covered with God's glory once again. And I think the more, I know in my own experience, the more I have taken time to just be with God, so many of us get into formulas like, oh, I have to spend 20 minutes in prayer, or I have to spend X amount of time doing this and doing that, but I'm talking about just allowing ourselves to be with God. And when I just allow myself to be with him, to spend time just soaking in his presence, then he has permission to then fill me and renew me with the glory of his presence. And I can remember when Moses was up on the mountain with God, I think for 40 days, and he came down, his face was filled with glory that it scared people. He had to put a veil over his face. I think that when we spend time with God, it may not be that kind of brilliant glory that comes out yet, but there will be oh, wow, I can see that this person's been with God. You'll be able to see it, not on their face, but also in how they conduct themselves, in the way they love, the way they exude the character of Jesus, in all of their interactions with whoever it may happen to be. And the one thing I love is that it's that perfect beauty, that perfect love of God that is what allays our anxiety and our fears. And we can put away our fear of what other people think, or fear of what's going to happen in the future. And we'll be able to live and rest right now in the now moment. Because remember the invitation of Jesus, come unto me and I'll give you rest. That'll be a reality for us, not just one day a week, but it'll be the way we have learned to live, in resting in the beauty, in the character, in the love of God.
A heartfelt thank you to our special guests and to the student panelists for their thoughtful engagement. On behalf of our sponsor, the Adventist Theological Society, and on behalf of the Life with God team, I would like to also thank our viewers and our listeners for being here. We hope that you have learned some new and helpful insights that will transform you more into the likeness of God and empower you to become a better human being. As you can see, these conversations bring together young adults and scholars who have dedicated their lives to advancing our understanding of God, of the Bible, and of the complex human personhood. It is a unique opportunity for you to get to know these committed servant leaders and learn from them as they interact with students from around the world. If you would like to support this podcast, you can do so with your presence, your comments, your prayers, and by sharing the program. If you're so inclined, you can also extend your financial support by donating to the Adventist Theological Society. To do so, go to www.atsjats.org/resources and find the Donate Now button. Make sure you also subscribe to the Adventist Theological Society YouTube channel, where you will find past and ongoing seasons. Thank you again, and I hope that you will join us next time as well.